Hey guys, I've been getting some questions lately about my speaker setup. Stuff like what kind of speakers I'm using, or why do I have 3 of them instead of 2. Those are simple questions on the surface, but they actually touch on some deeper stuff, like what kind of content necessitates more than 2 speakers, and how do you work with that? What abilities does using more than 2 speakers give you, and what should you look for in your speakers? There's lots of interesting conceptual stuff here. I'm going to get into all of it. Let's just dive right in. Now, in order to talk about a lot of this, you need a little bit of history. I'll keep it brief. Basically, prior to the invention of stereo by a guy named Alan Blumlein in the 1930s, every single sound system up to that point had just been monophonic, where you had every speaker playing the exact same sound. It was just the same sounds layered on top of each other, so it seemed like everything was kind of happening all at once from the same place. Stereo suddenly allowed you to pan all those sounds across the image and hear things a lot more like the human ears actually pick up sound. That in the film world gave way to surround sound, where you had a left, center, and right speaker, plus surround speakers behind the listening position, so you could kind of be immersed more in the soundscape, and a low frequency emitter, LFE or subwoofer. And most recently, we've seen the proliferation of immersive formats like Barco Aro or the big name in the game, Dolby Atmos. And real quick, Dolby Atmos upped our speaker count from the standard 7.1 surround to 64 individual speakers plus 2 different subwoofers. So you have many more places that you can put sound around an audience and a lot more control over how that sound is heard. So with all that in mind, the kind of content you're working on is going to dictate what sort of speaker system you're going to need. If you want to release in a theatrical space and you want people going and seeing your work in a theater, you kind of need to have a theater environment or a dub stage environment to push air the right ways and get your mix and your creative choices translating into a theatrical space. Whereas if you're working on YouTube content that's going to be consumed off of maybe somebody's iPad or headphones, you don't need that caliber system. I mix a lot of music in this room, so I'm going to of course need my left and right speakers to match my left and right ear if I'm listening on headphones or a standard stereo system. But I also work on commercials, short films, and feature films in here, so I need my speaker system to translate into the viewing environments that kind of content would need. And when it comes to theatrical work or larger format playback systems, if you have just a left and a right speaker watching a theater screen, it leaves this weird sort of sonic void directly in the center. So with the addition of a center speaker, you can fill that space a lot better, and the audience will kind of be more immersed in the story and the soundscape of a film, rather than kind of feeling this empty space and not really knowing why they don't like it. And conceptually, anything coming from the center of a stereo image is going to draw your listeners or your viewers' attention directly to what's on the screen in front of them, which makes it a great place to put all of your dialogue. So if you notice, every feature film that you go and see, unless there's a really specific reason to call your attention to somebody off screen, all of the dialogue is going to be straight up center. That then allows me to put all of my music, all of my sound effects, all the stuff that I don't want clouding the dialogue or distracting from that component of the story. I can put those independently of each other in the left and right speakers, and simply, again, because of the physics of the room and the physics of the playback system, it's going to feel more immersive to an audience than just a standard left and right, or even just a mono directly in the center. The same ideas go for the rest of any surround speaker system from 5.1 all the way up to a full-scale Dolby Atmos system. It's all about capturing and guiding the audience's attention with sound to specific components of the story. And as I've mentioned in a couple of other videos, the whole overarching idea of all of these things is to translate from one system to another so that any listener anywhere can get exactly the experience that they need to be fully immersed in the content they're viewing. Because translation is so important to both the technical and the creative minds in these fields, Dolby has actually created some specifications specifically around speaker placement for that translation. And one of my colleagues and I actually ended up inventing and patenting a recording rig that takes all of that into mind from the source, so recordings translate in a surround environment all the way through the theatrical process. That's how important this stuff is. I don't know if you guys are interested in the patenting process, but I'm happy to share a little bit about that if you'd like. But really, stepping back, again, the answer to why do I have 3 speakers? I know this is super long-winded, but again, it's all about translation. It's all about getting the creative idea behind a story into exactly the right space for an audience to be completely immersed by it. Now, when it comes to speaker choices, people who are creating or working with sound should be looking for different things than the average audience member or listener might. A listener is going to want sounds to just be pleasant and really smooth sounding, not harsh, not fatiguing to the ears, and so you'll find a lot of consumer products like bows that really sweeten sounds that get played through their systems. Sound professionals, by contrast, are going to be looking for speakers that are very revealing of issues and errors, and that are really kind of overly honest about what they're playing back, if that makes sense. If you're trying to work with sound on a pair of speakers that's maybe designed to sound a little bit more flattering to audio, then you're not going to hear a lot of the issues that might exist within those recordings. And so it's kind of like wearing rose-colored glasses. You look around and everything's beautiful and nice, and you take them off and you're like, whoa, what happened to the world? Good Lord. Doing sound work on less honest speakers is kind of the same thing. You listen back to it and you're like, wow, my mix sounds really good. And then you take it to something that's a little bit more professional and you go, oh, what did I just do to my soundscape? So I'm not looking for nice sounding speakers. I'm looking for more brutally honest speakers. And that's why I ended up choosing Genelec 8030s for my system here. In both the post world and the music world, you're going to see the same idea. The top level theatrical environments, you're going to find Meyer Asherons or Blue Horns, which are like 20 grand a speaker. They're designed to be as revealing as possible when they're pushed super loud and they're moving a lot of air in a theatrical space. Below that, there are some JBL speakers that have the similar idea in mind. In more editorial spaces and smaller mix rooms, you'll find JBL 708s. Another tried and true system is the JBL 6328, which translates really, really well to theatrical dub stages. You can kind of approximate a lot of the things happening in an editorial room, and when they hit a theater-sized space, they'll be about right. The step down from that in price point and to some degree quality would be the JBL 4328s, which, if you're familiar with the NS10s in the music world, the 4328 are kind of the equivalent in the post world, where it's sort of the mid-level. They sound good enough to use, they translate really well, they're not the most amazing things in the world, but they work. That's kind of where those are at. In that same ballpark, there's the Genelec 8000 series, which are the speakers that I've got. The 8020s are suited for a little bit smaller spaces, the 8030s, rooms about this size, 8040s and 8050s kind of go a little bit larger. You don't necessarily want large speakers in a small room. You can actually have speakers that are too big for your space. And that's partly why I chose the 8030s in the first place. They're about the right balance of price point, they have really good performance, they're very revealing speakers. They're also not too big to set behind this desk. They're not, 4-foot tall ATCs or something like that. And finally, in the lower budget range, there are the Avantone MixCubes, which, if you're not familiar with them already, they're these smaller speakers that are kind of designed to mimic how maybe the built-in speakers in a TV set would sound, something along the lines of a small consumer home theater setup. They're really great for checking how your mixes will translate to maybe less than ideal playback systems, and so using them especially in tandem with another speaker system is a great way to just check your mixes the same way you would taking a piece of music into your car and listening back to it. In the music world, at the highest price ranges, you'll find brands like ATC, PMC, and Meyer. Those are really designed to be the most pristine, revealing, authentic sounding speakers you can get, and you'll pay for them. They're 10 and 20 and 30 grand a piece. Still in the high budget range, but not as insanely priced, you'll find brands like Atom and Dyn Audio. Both of those are really, really revealing and also not fatiguing to your ears, so you can listen to them for a long period of time. And when you're mixing music and going over the same track for 8 hours a day, it's super helpful to be able to play back and not have your ears get tired of listening to the same thing. In the mid-range, as I mentioned before, there's the NS10, which are the kind of the classic white coned speakers that you see in a lot of studio photos. I've got to be honest, I hate how the NS10s sound. They are not particularly good sounding speakers, but they're really, really useful and they're widely used because they translate really well to other systems. If you can get mixes sounding great on NS10s, then it's going to sound amazing on every other playback system you listen to. And in the lower budget realm of music, again, you'll see Atom. They're a little bit more revealing than a lot of the other things out there, and they, again, just don't fatigue the ears as much as other speakers. A lot of home studios that I see will use the yellow KRK Rocket series speakers or the white coned HS series from Yamaha. I really wouldn't recommend either of those systems because they're not quite as revealing of sound or problems that you hear out of them. The KRKs flatter low end a lot, so they sound a lot better in the subharmonic frequencies than those sounds actually are. And the Yamahas punch a little bit more of the mid-range and they flatter that section a little more than they probably should. And so you're not getting the best representation of sound out of those systems. Now, obviously cost can be prohibitive when it comes to speaker systems, and I'm not sitting here saying you should go out and buy a pair of JBL 708s for, $2,000 a piece, but you do have to think about how much time you might be saving by getting more revealing speakers and therefore spending less time trying to correct errors in translation than if you were to invest in maybe a pair of Rocket 5s for a few $100 and have to bounce back and forth between multiple different systems over and over again, trying to figure out, well, is my low end translating or my mid-range frequencies kind of working or are they not, and trying to fix all these issues. Again, thinking of it as how much time are you spending actually making creative decisions versus how much time you're wasting having to go back and recheck the same things over and over again. But honestly, no matter what speakers you're using, no matter what room you're working in, no matter what hardware or software you might have, there is no substitute for just knowing how your system translates to others. And that just takes time and it takes practice. That's why you have a lot of music engineers do the stereotypical car test, like I've been saying, where they'll take their music that they've been working on in the studio and they'll listen back to it over and over again in their cars because they spend so much time in them for the most part that they get really familiar with how their car sounds, and so they can make fixes and adjustments from there. I mean, I drive a Jeep and it sounds like a giant box with speakers in it. It's not great. But if I can get music sounding really good in there, I know it's going to translate well to other spaces. And the same thing goes for the post-production environment. You see these big theatrical dub stages with their, again, cinematic, huge sound systems. After the mixers are done doing the theatrical mix, they'll bring in a smaller system that mimics the home theater environment a little bit better. And they'll do a separate mix most times for that, so it translates into everybody watching at home. Most of us will also check our mixes on things like those small MixCubes I mentioned, just to see how our mixes might translate to a more consumer setup of just built-in TV speakers or iPads or headphones or anything like that. So with all that in mind, I want to boil this down to just a few recommendations. The first, match your speaker system, your listening environment, to the type of content you want to be working on. If you're producing videos for YouTube, you can get away with just a stereo setup of reasonably decent speakers. You don't have to go all out for any reason necessarily. But if you want your work to be seen, say, in a theatrical environment, it might be worth considering investing in a system that's going to be a little bit more of an approximation towards that rather than just a simple stereo setup or cutting on headphones. My second recommendation, if you can, would be to invest in an additional listening system. If you've got some speakers that you like already, maybe get a pair of headphones just so that you have something else to check those things on. If you've got enough room or enough budget to buy a second pair of speakers, that's a really good way to just A/B your mixes and A/B your sound against another sound source. And last, like I've said before, there really isn't any substitute for just getting to know how your system sounds and how it translates to other playback environments. So I know that's a lot of information and some of it's kind of abstract, so it can be hard to get your head around, but the better you understand these concepts, the more you're going to be able to get out of your audio and the better you're going to be at translating your creative ideas into your work with sound. So hopefully that helps. That about wraps it up. Comment below with any questions. Don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe. Come follow me over on Instagram at AXK, and thanks for watching.